Welcome to the Expandable Mind podcast, where I speak to creators, entrepreneurs, and experts in their field about concepts and topics that not only intrigue me, but adds a sense of purpose and value to everyday life. I am Vainaki, your host on the Expandable Mind podcast, and in this episode, I speak to Chinezi Chijioke. We will be speaking about his remarkable yet inspiring journey, scaling a business and leadership. Chinezi is the co-founder and CEO of Nova Pioneer Education Group, a network of accessible 21st century private schools across Africa. Chinezi started his career as a secondary school mathematics teacher, where he was nominated by his student to be Who's Who of American Teachers. Prior to founding Nova Pioneer, he led McKinsey and Company's African education practice and co-authored McKinsey's 2010 Global Education Report, How the World's Best School Systems Keep Getting Better. He currently serves on the Global Advisory Council of Teach for All. Chinezi, why don't we get started by you telling us your story of how you became this man with a mission?
Well, I'll tell the short version of the story. I guess what's most important is that I've always, it was always a dream of mine, and I say always since I was 13, to find a way to open schools across where I called home, initially Nigeria, but all across the continent. And obviously blessed to be doing that now. And the story of, and that really came from when I moved from being a student in Nigeria at that point, where my father's from and where I'm from, to being a student in the US, where my mother's from, another part of my family's from. And sort of recognizing then just what the incredible potential would be of connecting the caliber of my peers, where that I grew up with in Nigeria, with the caliber of institution I was now getting to experience in the U.S. and thinking about, and potentially even more, and just thinking about this tremendous opportunity. I got really excited about this idea of creating institutions and environments where young people could just thrive, where the incredible talent and capacity and drive and sincerity of young Africans could just unleash itself, and what that could mean for them, for our countries, for our continent, for the world. And so that is, I've just been driven by just really excitement around that. And I've been a teacher because I wanted to learn about teaching and learning, and I loved it. I've been a consultant in education because I wanted to learn about growing enterprises and about sort of macro and education systems, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot and grew from it. And then I've been part of a team that's been really fortunate to found Nova Pioneer and to build institutions where remarkable young innovators and leaders such as yourself, Faheen, are both not just preparing themselves to shape the world, but are doing things to shape it right now, as we're doing through this conversation. So that's been sort of the golden professional thread through my life, and been sort of a case of finding and following purpose from
Yeah,
a
that sounds
relatively early
great.
young age.
I like the mission. It's already started at 13 years old, so it's been brewing up in you. It sounds, I don't
Yeah.
know, like, like those rising up stories that something that just starts building up. It's like in a movie that you're at the climax all of a sudden. Like, it's that type of story that you got here. And
Well, it's funny. I'd almost characterize it.
yeah,
One of our culture principles is always growing, and so I think one of my learnings is just this always growing. If we're all unfinished, and there's always new chapters, and we always sort of grow and learn along the way. But on the one hand, life is short. On the other hand, life is really long. And if one is incrementally growing each month, each year, there's just it's tremendous how that can accumulate in terms of our capacity to do
yeah,
interesting
and
things
the
and to
reason why
contribute.
I named my little business, online business, or whatever you call this at the moment, um, right now it's just the podcast, and I say just the podcast, but the Expand Mind is kind of influenced indirectly or maybe directly. I really don't know, but being at Nova, it opened my horizons to a lot of things. I wouldn't be able to do this. Tell me 6 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do something like this. And embracing your fears would is something that I'm still working on. But Nova's allowed me. It's put me out there. It's like you've conquered it. You have the ability. There's a lot of people are going to judge you. Something that we all go through in life, but at the same time, you must satisfy your curiosity. Your curiosity is more important than judging. Hence,
Step
the
forward.
expandable mind. And
Well, well, one of the things I love about the name, the expandable mind, that word expandable, implicit in it is the kind of like the universe, the never-ending expandable possibility. And I recall I was among other things, I was a wrestler in high school. So one of the sports I competed in was wrestling. And I remember one of my reflections from wrestling and from soccer. I was also a soccer player. One thing I remember was that um, one of my discoveries or sort of reflections was that we are far more often constrained by our own minds, by what we imagine to be our own limits, than by any real physical or capacity or external limits to what we can do. We are much more often constrained by what we imagine is possible, by how we see ourselves and how we see what the limits of what we could be are. And so the idea of an expandable mind, I love it because that's the whole point. Is if you keep stepping towards it, the possibilities just get wider and bigger. And the idea that you sort of take one step, you start the podcast, you learn from it, you think about it, you have an intention that it's a business that contributes and does really well, and you see new possibilities. It opens up. It's sort of the mind expands, the world expands, and so if implicit in the name expandable is this sort of infinite possibility that I really believe exists if we just accept that that's the
Yeah,
case and work towards it, you know?
it was such a weird way the podcast came up. It was through a walk, and that's where I kind of like came upon the idea. It's just like when you're 13 years old, how did you
Mm.
actually know that um you wanted to be in the education sector, and you knew that something was different? I had this already, that craving, in like the craving curiosity to find out more. What is lacking? How do I improve it? How do I educate other people? uh how do I fill the market, basically? That's the business term.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, like, my advice is you don't have to know the exact form it's going to take now. But if you can identify, if you can get interested in things, not just one thing, but in multiple things. I got really interested. I can describe the evening on a playground in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, when I just got really interested and got excited. At that time I was thinking about after school programs and youth talent camps and universities, but just the idea of, man, my peers with opportunities, sort of in an environment that's enabled us to unleash our talent. How exciting would that be? Now that's not very concrete yet. That's not saying, okay, I have a business plan or I have a development strategy. But over the next several years, sometimes I thought about schools. I have sketches in my trunk from when I was 16, 17 that were sketches of what a school premises would look like. When I was in business school, I developed a business plan. I did a course that was around sports academies, West African sports academies, I called them at the time. This has taken different forms. I worked as a consultant for a while, and I worked in a group. First, I worked in something called Africa.com, which was a sort of internet in Africa, and then I was working in a database consulting firm, and I didn't feel really at the core close to what I wanted to do. So I spoke to a mentor, and he gave me he was because I could answer the question, what am I interested in? What am I passionate about?
Mm.
He was able to give me good advice. So my advice would be to if you find things that are really interesting or curious, to get interested in stuff, and then to sort of just imagine it, start to work towards it, try different things, apprentice in different ways, start things like this podcast and use it as an opportunity to talk to a lot of different folks. But it's those interests, when pursued with a creative and active mind, then will manifest into, yeah, the enterprise and the business plan. And those things are really just manifestations of ideas that are hopefully rigorously shaped, because it's the ideas that are rigorously shaped and then executed upon
Yeah.
makes the difference. One more thing I'll say, just I know it's a bit of a long response, but one more thing I'll say is then at some point, as you're doing now, but you'll do it maybe multiple times over the course of your life, is actually in the doing. The difference between folks who build enterprises that work and folks who wish they had
Yes.
built something, whether it's enterprise or any other initiative,
Yes.
is that they tried, they actually did it. Um, in my life, I've had probably 15 ideas and I've followed two, and those two have inevitably, because we work at them, become something, whether, as more or less successful. But the 13 other things might have been really interesting ideas too, but
Mm.
I didn't do anything about it, right? And so it's sort of 30% in the idea and 70% or 10% in the idea and 90% in the doing of it, that one actually gets to
Yeah,
build things
and
that
it sounds like you're a
are
natural
revolutionary.
entrepreneur from already that time. You started, at 17 years old. You're already sketching what your school grounds are going to look like. Now that's impressive, really impressive. But and you say you still have those there. Do you have you framed them, or do you keep them with you, like as like a motivation force.
They're in a trunk somewhere. I occasionally go back and it's funny. I find myself, I more often go back and look at like diary entries I wrote when I was 14 or 15. I've looked at those plans once in a while. They're interesting and fun, but no, I don't. They're not. One day I'll have to figure out what to do with all these various artifacts.
Maybe you should create it like like the history cabinet or something like that. You put it as like the monumental cabinet of how the dream came alive. Basically, that would be really cool. And I think like students would love. That's why the podcast that revolves around your journey. Your students of Nova Pioneer would love to know your story.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
how did your childhood? So you've spoken
Sure.
about being 13. You've been in sports. You've been in, should I say, encouraged or being faced by sports. You've seen different educational viewpoints. You could put it like that. How did that shape this vision? Especially since you've been to prestige education, tertiary educations like Harvard, Stanford. How does that shaped your viewpoint
Yeah.
of Nova Pioneer?
Well, so let me sort of speak about this in three chapters. There's like early childhood, and I think early childhood, I think there are a couple of things that my mother in particular, but also my father did through the examples. The first was that my mother, uh, ne- the roles and expectations they gave us set up on were never constraining. So it was never that, Chinezi, your job at home is to do one thing, or particularly never gender constraining. So for example, the roles, whether all like we did all the domestic chores, no matter what they were. We did all the. Or at the same time, I baked and I sold the cakes. We had mangoes in our yard. My brothers and I pluck them and we go sell them. This is an Unsaka. I liked Christmas caroling just as much as I liked playing soccer. Like there was never this idea that you could only be one kind of kid. I could be, I felt I could be interested in lots of things, and there wasn't an expectation specifically of what that pigeonholed me in any way. And I think that was really great because it enabled me to really define what I was interested in and go pursue it. And then the second example, also while I was at childhood, I think is both my parents, but particularly my dad, sort of lived a life of real sort of service, and he was a professor and scholarship. But he was sort of this ethic that
Yeah.
he's a nation builder, sort of in Nigeria, and that was sort of his like he started a university, the Institute of Management Technology, interestingly enough, and he was part of early faculties in multiple universities, and part of the early faculty of one of the first, the University of Nigeria, one of the
Wow.
first wholly Nigerian university, and so he'd always been someone whose life was, he marshaled his talents towards nation building. And so somehow I think that example sort of created a kind of implicit assumption about the purpose, trying to be purposeful about how we use our time. So I think that was quite early, and that's childhood. And that's not about school necessarily. That's about early childhood learning from home. Then middle years, I think in high school, I think kind of things you mentioned, sports and all of it, I think stayed curious. I think what I probably got most from the sports you mentioned was just the idea that um, if you work hard and if you take a leap of faith towards something you consider meaningful, and you work hard at it, it inevitably leads to really to growth and to outcomes that were may not have been exactly what you imagined or were going after, but were pretty good. So I think about winning championships in our soccer team, or starting as a wrestler who really had never wrestled before, and then sort of being able to compete in state and national championships. Like you do that by sort of taking a leap of faith. Say, I'm going to work hard at it. I only worked really really hard in those teams. Similarly, in academics and in sports, in academics rather. Sorry, I think that I probably learned most from my high school experience was that the idea of taking a leap of faith towards something that is meaningful to you, hard, and working hard at it, and if you don't get exactly that thing, it's okay. Like uh, that's not failure in its bad sense. That is the sort of constant learning, but it inevitably takes you somewhere interesting and good, and you grow. It's actually the growth that really matters, right? So that's what I learned from high school. That's just that, take a leap of faith and work really hard at it, right? And then from the third part, which you mentioned, some institutions like Harvard and Stanford, which are more like my university and graduate school, learned a lot, gained a lot of friendships and so on as well there too. Learned a lot in terms of my academic preparation, my scholarship, and so on. But I think that what those did is those opened up a much broader sense of possibilities for me, in terms of a sense of imagining myself anywhere in the world, a sense of a network, a sense of potential access if I work towards it. So I think those institutions in some ways then became good conduits for how I pursue the possibility, and not just sort of my own self growth, but sort of connecting me a bit more into the world. So probably those three chapters, different
No, that's
stages of,
brilliant.
of my
You've
growth and
spoken
development.
about quite a few things, and I've spoken in other podcast episodes with other guests, and I think you embody all of them. Like you've condensed them into your life chapter, into
Mm,
three chapters actually. And my question would
mm,
be a little bit of a selfish question, or I don't know. Would you ever consider writing a book? Because it sounds like an amazing story how you've built it up and how passionate you were about education and building it up forward and following that path. It because I think your parents had a great influence on your in your education journey. Like they like were
mm.
always diverse minded, if that's a term I can use, because and I think
Yeah.
a lot of parents out there, the audience that listens to this, if your parents are very diverse in the way they think, and Mr. Chijioke, you can probably
Hmm.
agree on this, but if your parents are diverse in the way they think and they're not putting a limit or constraining you in the way you think, so, oh, you must be a doctor because this person here, you're going to be rich, and they're focusing on the money
Hmm.
aspects instead of the meaningful aspects. And
Mm,
I read a book by Paul
mm,
Millard,
mm,
and I had him on the podcast as well about finding meaningful work. And it sounds like you've actually found that meaningful work. But my question would be how in the future are you planning on sustaining this meaningful work? What is how have you guaranteed that to yourself?
yeah, I love how you started and ended that question, because my sort of reflection, the question of, would I write a book, was I don't really think I haven't really thought about that, because I'm, you know, because I'm very much focused on what the opportunities to build and grow and learn. You know, I'm maybe halfway through the story, and so in terms of my life, and so I know when I just recapped the three chapters of just my formal education, and then I've had just as much time in work and learning, and I've grown tremendously and learned tremendously from that. And I'm looking forward to the next, 30, 40, 50 years of learning and growth and contribution. And it will shape, and I hope I move gracefully into the different stages of my life going forward. But there's to your point, there's so much more ahead in terms of learning and growth. And I'm excited about it. And in fact, one of my reflections, I think I've become more, I'm going to say two things that are sort of potentially contrasting. One is, I think one of the real blessings has been what you said. I was quite early to find something I was passionately purposeful about, and I've been able to pursue that and build a
Mm,
path on that, and that's been great. And I have, and we could talk about where one find how a young person could think about
yeah,
locating purpose, right? And I do have some thoughts on that. I could share. We could talk about that, but that's sort of finding purpose. But the other part of it is staying open and staying curious. So you can find that and pursue it, but don't close yourself off to it. And in fact, if there's any sort of advice I'd give myself earlier, it'd be,
yeah,
while you're doing that, stay interested, because people who are interested are interesting, and new ideas, and actually the creativity comes from the combining of different things. A Steve Jobs who combines technology and calligraphy
yes,
to create fonts, like that is like the creative
yes,
nexus of different things. So you have to stay interested. And one of the things I'm learning now is, while I'm, for example, deeply passionate about Nova Pioneer and continue to grow Nova Pioneer, is like, how do I continue to learn and grow and stay curious and think about what it is my contribution can be, and how I can learn and grow. So being able to do both those things, right, locate purpose, work on it, pursue it, and stay broadly interested and curious. Um, I think about some of the people who I know to be sort of
yes.
polymaths, because they're curious and they're incredibly dynamic. And so, yeah, those would be sort of, when I look to then come to the end of your question, like looking forward, I'm just looking forward to learning and
Embracing the
growing
curiosity, I
throughout this
like
journey.
that. And yeah, you mentioned about
Absolutely.
passion for students finding their passion. Please, by all means, expand upon that. I don't want to forget the question.
Sure. I mean, I think that purpose is located at the intersection of problems worth solving and things you are, you know, uh, passionate about, right? So you're interested in. So problems. And I start with things that are interesting. Like start with something like what's something that's really interesting. Like where do you when you're reading? I used to read the. I used to find it would take me a long time to read like a page in let's I don't know pick a textbook. I'm not going to name a subject because I don't like I should have
Yeah.
been more curious in all the subjects. But like there's some things that would take me a while to read. A book might take me a while to read, and I would read through the sports page and sports, the whole sports section of the newspaper, and just sit down, get through it, cram it, and every statistic would like stick in my mind, right? And it's an indication. I love autobiographies. I find myself just reading through autobiographies, and this other kind of book, I'd sort of get 20 pages in and then not pick up again. And it's a good signal to say, wow, that's something you're really
Yeah.
interested. You're really interested in people's stories. That's that's a signal. Think about things that are potentially interesting. Education was something that was interesting for me, and when you as you cultivate, Tony Wagner has this book called Creating Innovators, and it talks about the progression from play to passion to purpose. So, and particularly in one's teens, one is in a milieu where one is often discovering and think about things about what you're passionate about. Perfect time for it. Like do that, and through college, like pursue, stay interested, and try to find things that excite you and move you, and ideas that move you, and professors that excite that get you really interested in. Sort of that's the passion world. And as you're doing that, use that to solve and identify how can that solve problems that are worth solving. So if you're going to find a problem that's worth solving, then those that becomes purposeful. Now you can apply something you're passionate about towards something that makes a difference. That's
Yes.
purpose. That overlap right there.
Yeah.
So if you do Venn diagrams in math, right, the circle that is your passion and the circle that is a problem worth solving, that overlap
Mm.
is purposefulness, right? Then the last one, the third one, if you're going to do it, if you sort of want to pursue it almost like an enterprise, is like, can it be done in a way that is, when I say profitable, I don't mean Facebook and, I
Yes.
don't know, FMB profitable. It could be, it doesn't have to be, but I mean, it's sustaining. It can generate, can support itself in some way, or there's a mechanism for it to implement it. And that just takes some problem solving. Say, how do I manifest it in a way
Yes.
that is practical, right? That can actually be applied and can sustain itself. And then if you can bring that third circle, that middle overlap is
Yes.
like pursue it, right? I'm using way too many P's. Passion, with problems worth solving, creates purpose. If you can find a practical or profitable way to pursue it, then you pursue it, and there's just tremendous. Maybe last P I'll throw in there's potential in that overlap of three circles. Right, that's that intersection of those three
Mm.
circles. That Venn diagram is has tremendous potential, tremendous possibility, and would encourage
Yeah,
folks to
and
pursue it.
how do you use so you found purpose and so forth. How do you use it? So you've been CEO of Nova Pioneer for the past 8 years. What does that? How do you use in a day?
Mhm.
How do you use like keep that keep that in your mental toolbox so that the different P's, purpose, and so
Yeah.
forth. How do you keep it in your mental toolbox?
Well, it's very practical in how it guides what we do. So we call ourselves a for-profit, for-purpose enterprise. We exist for a purpose. Being a for-profit enterprise is just the mechanism by which we earn the rights to get capital to pursue our purpose, which is the education of innovators and leaders who will shape the African century. So our purpose is our mission. That's why we exist. Without it, like
Yes.
we wouldn't be doing this, right? And that's why we do it. Now we're for profit because that's a practical way to earn the capital to pour into our purpose, right? So it's a solution for because it's otherwise very hard to scale. And part of our mission is to scale so that we can so that Noveniers, such as yourself and such as my daughter, as you're pursuing things through life, you can have a tremendously wide alumni network, a peer alumni network to tap into. There's real social capital on
Yes.
I want that for you, right? I want you to have access to that. And so the for profit for purpose is fundamentally, and when I speak to teammates or speak with investors or what, we describe ourselves in that same consistent way. Then, in terms of more practical, in terms of leading the organization, we have something called our teammate value proposition, and it's basically how we think about why one would be part of this journey. And the foundational element is what we call
Yes.
mission alignment, purpose alignment. So the very first session, I just did a led a PD session, professional development session, with some of our teammates 2 weeks ago, and the very first anchoring session in that, and some of the other training programs is a session in which we talk about. The first question isn't what is Nova Pioneer doing. The first question is what do you find meaningful? Think about times when you felt really motivated and energized in your life. Think about times when you felt excited about the work you're doing, or even it's not work, about what, or think about your 100th birthday and your best friends speak about you. I've done this, I've run this exercise with
Yes.
grade 11 sometimes. Um, what do they say about you in your 100th birthday? Well, write your own, write what will be said about your own funeral,
Yeah.
right? What do you hope that will be? It starts with, what do you find meaningful? Then we ask, here is Nova Pioneer's mission. Where do you see the overlap between what you find purposeful and Nova Pioneer's mission? And when you, and as a student, what do you find? Where do you find that in our vision of an Noveneer? Where do you find that overlap? Because when you find that overlap, there's
Mm.
tremendous power. Because then you pursuing a mission is the organization pursuing its mission, and there's wind in your sails. And when you don't, if you can't find that
Yes.
overlap, then it's not a good match because either you or the organization is compromising. So this finds its way very much into our training programs, into our sessions, and it's the foundation before you even get to our culture principles, before you even get to compensation structures, before you even get to growth pathways, before you even get to what to expect from a manager-managee relationship. Before you get to those technical aspects of value proposition, the foundation is, uh, do we find fit between personal purpose and organizational purpose? And if we do, there is, I mean, we can activate that. Then I think that's a big part of what it means to be an Oveneer, whether it's as a
Okay.
colleague or as a
Yeah,
student.
that sounds really great. You've managed to do this, and I'm not in the business. I'm not in the business field and so forth. I focus on the curiosity side of things, but it sounds like you've managed to differentiate the
Mhm.
different levels in the organization, and you prioritize in the beginning. Finding your purpose is the ultimate point of view, because if you find your personal purpose, you'll be able to, should I say, mix it or I don't know, support the organizational.
Combine it, find the
Yeah.
synergy. Yeah.
And then it comes to, and I read an article a few weeks ago about the different levels and so forth. And I never heard you actually say this, whether you've talked to us in person, come to Nova Pioneer Monday campus, and you've spoken to us or something like that. You never define yourself as the CEO or the co-founder or anything like that. It sounds like you have a big importance on, yes, there is titles, but the more important thing is fulfilling a purpose and a mission rather than categorizing ourselves by a title, because the title can be anybody's type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, then titles. I mean, I talked about sort of that overlap between personal purpose and organizational purpose as the foundation of the sort of the
Mm,
starting point for a journey as an Noveneer. I don't know that it's the most important. I'm not saying this is the most important. I think the alignment to our culture principles, certainly having the skills and feeling like one is being developed, all those things are hugely important. So I'm not saying it's the most important, but it's certainly the foundation. The rest, everything else rests on it, and it's a starting point. I don't have a point of view on what's the most important, but I think it's a starting point. But to the point of like formal roles and titles, I mean, I think it's
mm,
important to organize responsibilities. I think they're important for creating like career pathways, for having it's important for me be able to, as a student, you when you're learning, you want to. There's something called your zone of
mm.
proximal
Yes.
development, ZPD. It's sort of academic literature, but it's you want to always be. The way I think about it is stretched beyond comfort,
Yes.
but before despair. Right? You don't want to be comfortable because then you're not really growing, but you don't want to be desperate because then you're not really learning either. It's
Mm,
then you feel at risk and in danger. You want to be in that like stretch, that ZPD. That's not just a student reality. That's all of us reality. Like we all want to be stretched, and we all should be stretched. Then we are constantly growing. So when I think about it, like the roles, hopefully, are roles that allow me to align my stretch into my responsibilities. So like I'm being stretched, so I'm growing, and the roles help define accountabilities, and they're important for clarity and
okay.
organizing effectively. But really important, and this is where our culture principle of servant leadership comes in, is roles define our responsibility of service towards others in the organization before they define our responsibility of direction, if I could put it that way, right? A leader is like we talk about servant leaders, not bosses, a Nova Pioneer. And I hope Noveneer students will sort of that difference between a leader who's there to, like a president who's there to serve their country and a president who's there to overlord their country. That difference is so much of the potential and the tragedy that we've experienced on this continent over the past
Yes.
50 100 years, right? So that framing for Noveneer is about, that title is a responsibility. It's not and it's not it's not a I don't know the right word, but it doesn't make you a
Yes.
boss. It makes you a servant leader. And if you can frame it that way, if it gives you obligation to help others be successful, fantastic. If you think it gives you license more than that, then we've
No,
pretty
I
much got a
love.
problem.
I think I'm taken back by those words. It's like the motivational speech that you always look for, and I've got it like in person here. Yeah, and you spoke about proximal development. I've learned that in my A level English syllabus. So we actually spoke about that in from Vygotski's theory of
Awesome.
language development and so forth. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I can totally relate on that.
Yep.
But you spoke about a leader as well. And what is your definition of a leader?
Yeah. Um, it's a good one because there are different types of leaders, but I think ultimately leading, maybe more than leader, because we all can be leaders, but I think leading is um, finding ways to mobilize collective effort towards a common positive purpose. And a positive purpose. I think there's ethics involved in
Yes.
leadership. But if you can, and you don't, whether you're the face of it or not the face of it, or you're mobilizing different ways, but finding mobilizing, I think, it's a collective effort. So collective means more than just mine, and then effort. It doesn't. It can mean people, but it could also mean capital. It could mean resources. So mobilizing collective effort and resources towards achieving a positive that's leadership. And the way to do it, I think, is, and really, if you think about it that way, then you're problem solving, like how do I help others more effective? Let me make it very granular, very simple example. When I have a to-do list, when I sit down often on a Saturday and I write my to-do list, and so I know that from Sunday I know I've got some work to do and I've got the work for the week ahead. And when I look at my to-do list on Sunday and I sit down to
Yes.
work on it, I try to knock off the things first where others are waiting for input from me in some way. Because if I do
Mm.
that, I'm clearing the way for others to progress and get their work done and be successful. And then I can come back to the time of things that are my responsibilities for which others are not yet dependent on me on immediate. So, but if I did it the other way around, I may be getting things done that are on my agenda, but I'm actually holding back others. So my role, I need to make sure I am doing my best to provide the input as quickly as I can and as clearly as I can, so others can
Yeah.
can go about work. Now that's a very like mundane, practical example, but it is an important aspect. Like when you're leading, you have to be problem solving. Say, how do I help others be more successful? Because their success is our collective success. And then how do I make sure I'm given the, you could call it strategic direction, but the trying to help us collectively figure out a way to make choices that prioritize things that really get most of it, like get achieve our mission. So, for example, there's always more and more things. Like I could think of so many things I'd love for our schools to be able to do and offer, and all of them sound interesting and individually possible, right? But we can't do all of them. And we've often
Yes.
got to lead conversation and lead thinking and even discipline myself to say what's most going to enable our students to have excellent outcomes and experience that develop into innovators and leaders. And if we have to make choices, and sometimes they're tough choices. And when you do it, but part of my job is to, again, that's positive outcome. So leading, I think, is, again, I haven't used this definition before, so I really appreciate you asking the question because it forces me to put an articulation towards it. But it's being able to mobilize collective action and resources towards achieving a positive purpose.
Okay. I like the collective part, how you've expanded upon it, because leadership, I believe that it starts all at home and so forth. But how you spoke about like how your parents actually like motivated you and diversified your vision of education. So how have you kind of influenced your family, so your daughter, your wife? How do you encourage them to actually take part in this leadership type of the concept of leadership? Where does it start for you at home?
Yeah, no, I really love your reframe as it being family, because that too is collective energy and resources towards something positive and purposeful, which is sort of our growth and learning, our spirituality, and our daughter's success and happiness in life. If I think about that, and so yeah, I mean, I think it is throughout it we have to learn. So we have regularly have conversations, about, for example, what we care about, what's important to us. Very much have listening ears to try to eyes and ears to understand and observe and listen to what my daughter is passionate about, interested in, curious about, to try to figure out how we can serve her development. without while we certainly can play a role in providing advice and guidance, we also have to have have a former board member and good friend now, who said who often was often saying, God's given us 2 ears and one mouth for good reason. Listen more than you talk, and the same thing as a parent and as a parent. And so we'll talk and think and pray together and so on. But we have to also have ears to sort of understand where each other is and what each other needs. And so if our collective purpose is like is the fulfillment of what a family can be and can be in this world for both our personal happiness and also for the impact we can have in the world, then leadership, whether it comes from myself, my wife, or our children, is really about how do we marshal our collective efforts towards making that possible.
Yeah, and that's great. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see how leadership plays a big role from family to organization. And what is the number one aspect? And this comes to when it comes to your team or maybe the organization, Nova Pioneer, the organization itself. What is the trait that you look for in all your employees when bringing them onto the Nova Pioneer Education Group?
Yeah, I really don't know. There's one trait. I mean, I think that there are a lot of
Yeah.
things that are important, but I guess firstly would probably be the what's captured by our always growing culture principle, which is the desire to constantly grow and learn. And when I say grow, I don't just mean like progress and advance. I mean to learn, the genuine willingness to take feedback and to see the world with positive intention. Because truly, it's I mean, it's that's what stunts us is if we really struggle with feedback and ability to grow, or if we don't if we interpret feedback and input from others with fear and anxiety as opposed to attributing positive intention. Those are pretty foundational, and um, it, yeah, to me, they're the starting point of fit, right?
Yes.
Or the second point of it. The starting point is that alignment of personal purpose and organizational purpose. If that aligning point is there, and that's probably the first thing, Frank. Whenever I have conversations when I'm potentially let's say there's a leadership position or organization I'm recruiting for, or we're trying to develop, and I am having conversations with external candidates who I don't yet know well, or even internal candidates who I may not know as well. Um, that coffee conversation is often just about like them to get to that sense like what do they care about,
Mhm.
what's going to be fulfilling for them, what's their path, and then I try to understand that, and then try to reflect on how that may be a fit with us, and then I try to get a sense of like is a teammate who's a culture fit? So are they growing? Are they always growing? Have they have they struggled at times and got back, picked themselves up, and got up from it? So I think that's probably the next point, and then we can get to all the technical stuff and all the demonstration. But I really believe if you are if you're a learner, and I really your trajectory, no matter where you are at a given point, if you're an active learner in your own life, then you are growing, and your trajectory compounds upon itself like compound interest, right? In
Yes.
math or in banking, it compounds. Versus if, let's say, I happen to have achieved a high level of experience or expertise, but I'm not really growing, I've plateaued, and I will bet 10 times out of 10 on the growth trajectory over the high starting point. That high starting point has to be so much higher for me to prefer a plateaued individual who says, "I got it. Leave me alone. I can do this. I'm an expert."
Yes.
I'll hire an expert for a contract.
Yes.
I will invest in a teammate who's growing, right? And same thing I'd say to students. Um, Focus much more on your growth and where you're at any given time. A student who is, I'm missing. I'll tell a quick story. That I won't use his real name, but I had a classmate in high school who was a good friend, earnest
Yeah.
guy. At high school, I'd say he wasn't in all the top level classes because we used to have leveled classes in my high school. He was sort of in what you call the level two classes. There was level one, two, and three
Yes.
at that time, and he sort of earned his B's, his C's and B's in his level two classes. But he was very earnest and he was a learner, and I didn't have a language for it at the time. But then I went off to college. He went to a different college. I went to my college, and we sort of we kept in touch, but didn't really nurture that well. But he went to a pretty good university. I come to work at it. I leave when I in the year I left to go for my first job when I left Harvard. He joined and became a graduate student at Harvard, and then became a professor later at
Wow.
Harvard in anthropology, which to me is awesome. Like, this is the story of, I wish I could name him, but yeah, this is but the story of a classmate who he was just a grower, and so my why I tell this story, particularly for the students who would listen to this podcast, is grow, learn, grow. Life is long enough that the trajectory of growth, no matter where you are, is compounds upon itself. And where you'll end up in 10, 15 years because of growth is that expandable limitlessness. Like just grow, just learn. And don't be so don't hold so much anxiety about where you might be. And if you're great, don't hold arrogance about where you might be.
Yes.
Like have the humility to continue to
Yeah,
grow.
and you spoke. I like the fact that you brought up arrogance. And arrogance actually plays a big part. So in the moment you get to the senior positions or whatever, you become more educated. You become the tendency is to become more arrogant in a way. And I noticed that myself. I can't say that if I haven't been arrogant once in my life, I'll be lying. Um, but how does one actually humble themselves down, like especially when you in education, so you understand that as you go up you're like, oh, I'm educating myself, I know more than this person. Yeah, I can in a way belittle them, which is not the right point of view. But how do you actually humble yourself? Because they often say this there's this phrase in my house that humble yourself or it will humble you. And and it's a true
Exactly.
statement. I've come down. I was up in cloud nine. All of a sudden, oh, I know this year you're getting number one in class and all that, and it's great. It follows an achievement narrative, as in the pathless part it was said there, achievement narrative. But at the
Mhm.
same point, it's humbling to take down when I'm self-reflecting, and I take self-reflection as a big thing, and I often hear it in your conversation about your story and your life, Mr. Chijioke, that you reflect on your actions. And I think I kind of like answered some part of the question, but at the same time I'd like to hear your voice
Mhm.
on how does a student humble himself.
I think it is good to take stock of your achievements and your growth, and kind of like climbing up a mountain. It's good once in a while to pause and look and say, "Wow, I've traveled quite a journey," and feel good about it, and feel motivated and encouraged by
Mhm.
it. But the moment you stop moving is the moment you stop,
Yes.
right? And others will walk by you. And so, there's so many, read the Desiderata. I think it's in Desiderata where it talks about there'll always be people greater and lesser than yourself in many different ways. And there are people whom I may be a faster runner than, but who I could learn a heck of a lot about French from, right? And it's not one dimensional. There are multiple dimensions. And so, um, it's actually the beauty of the world that you can have multiple talents that can connect, right? And that I am greater in some areas and lesser in other areas than others, and we're able to complement each other. That is like an awesome trait about humanity. So things I remember there's a football coach, Andy Reid, he's an American football coach, but I remember he used to coach one of my favorite football teams, and he always used to say when after when they were winning, guys, it's never as good as it feels or as bad as it feels. So our emotions are never that internal narrative is never really well calibrated. We're always either too high or too low, and the reality is somewhere in between. And it's good to sort of put an even keel. I think perhaps one of my most simultaneously humbling and like invigorating, exciting like learning moments. I remember walking to Widener Library. This is at Harvard when I was a student early there. And of course, you've just got into Harvard, you're starting, you're like, you're feeling like, yeah, I'm on my journey.
Mhm.
I'm very excited about your achievements at that point in
Yes.
life. And you walk into Widener Library and you see just the stacks and stacks and floors of books that have been written by people who've dedicated years of their lives potentially to those books with deep scholarship, and you realize in the course of my life, I will never uh, let alone write
Mm.
a hundredth of those books, a
Yes.
thousandth of those books. There's just so much out there, and so much that focuses. So you pretty clearly like I'm like bigger pond, and lots that is out there that I just haven't encountered. And on one hand, it's depressing. Man, I wish I could read all those things, and I wish in my lifetime I could learn all those things and read all those things. Think about just the amount of knowledge, even good, accurate knowledge that exists on the internet. We, we just don't have time in this world to digest it all. But it's also exciting because it says there's so much more out there. There's so much more that one can grow into. And so, if you can be like sort of like the Siddhartha says, if you can be simultaneously proud and encouraged by the path you've walked and the achievements you've achieved, they're not meaningless. They are meaningful. They speak to your possibility, but humble and eager and curious about all the things that are yet ahead of you that you don't know, that you could understand, that you could do better. And so you have an always joy of learning and growth mindset around those things. Then that's great. That's great. Pursue that. It's that's not arrogance. Arrogance really comes from I think is much more of a view that uh, I don't have a real good definition for that, but it's much more. It's that point on the climb when you say, "Yeah, I got it." It's the hare and the tortoise when the hare sleeps
Mhm.
and the tortoise walks by. That's arrogance, right? And that I don't think we want to
Yeah,
be.
I like that view, and I kind of like want to retract the words now because I like had that joy of learning all of a sudden. But I have experienced, I personally have experienced arrogance in my own way. Being number one
Hmm.
has always been like a big thing for me and so forth. But at the
Hmm.
same point,
Hmm.
I've taken this like I think over the IG stretch when I wrote my IGCSE to grade 12, I took some time to just reflect. And when I was planning the podcast and all that, I asked myself, what is the one thing that I want the mission of this podcast to bring out in people? And one of them was the ability for people to self-reflect. um, and my mom's always telling me manifest, self-reflect, meditate, and all of that type of thing. And tell me 2 years ago to do that type of thing, I'll tell you nonsense to your face. And I'd say
Yeah.
that's absolute nonsense. There's no such thing as luck. There's no such thing as manifesting. The universe doesn't hear nobody. It's just a sound out there. It's physics, and it changed my view. I totally started reading Deepak Chopra. I've read so many people. I've
Yeah.
spoken to so many people, like yourself, Mr. Chijioke, okay, with so much of knowledge, and so much of like motivation and insight that at the end of the day, you like this thing to yourself. Wow, I'm really humbled. I'm so blessed
I mean,
to.
yeah. I mean, just I would say to you, Vaheen, and by speaking to you, I'm speaking. I'm hoping I'm speaking to other students and people out there for whom this may be relevant. Is like I think what you should be, you can be take pride in the achievements, and you say, wow. And if achievement is having the highest outcome on an IGCSE exam in English, let's say, that's great to be feel gratitude and pride over that achievement.
Mm,
But and it's in one definition that is number one on English in that class, for example. But as soon as you redraw that circle, say, okay, what number one among who? You can redraw that circle in South Africa, in the world. Or is that the number one result? And is it number one result in just one subject or multiple subjects? And that's just the academic brain side of things. To your point, how about spirituality? Like I can build my academic growth also, do I really understand this stuff? I could be the top test achiever, but do I have really the most nuanced understanding of the text we've read? I can imagine you and I could both read a book and we'd get something interesting out of it. And that'd be wonderful. We can appreciate that. But if we sit down and talk about it over a cup of coffee, I would both develop my own incoming thoughts more and hear more from you and vice versa. And then that's learning and that's growth. And so it's like, be proud and encouraged by your achievements because they're evidence that with effort you can and you can learn, right?
yes.
But be much more focused on the opportunities to learn, to achieve more, to grow more, to, you know, and I don't just mean like, when I say learning, I don't mean like fill in the gaps of your deficiencies. I mean, grow your strengths as well as fill in the gaps of your deficiencies, right? And I think, that number one changes as soon as you draw the circle differently, right? It's no longer my class of 15 or 50 or 100. It's now a world, go step into Wits, go step into Yale. And if I go, okay, wow, maybe, well, there's someone who's a better essay writer than I am after all. In fact, there are a lot of them. That's fine. That's okay. And I don't have to be depressed about that. I can it gives me an opportunity to learn with other really remarkable young people to get even better. And meanwhile, maybe they can learn about South African history from me or whatever it is. And so yeah, just be proud while not being fixated, I guess, on
Yeah.
where you are.
And yeah, that would be, you've spoken about culture principles. And what I'd like to ask you is, what are Nova Pioneer's six culture principles? Because I think everybody's heard me speak and heard you speak about all this growing solutions first and so forth. But what are the six culture principles? And like, give us a brief explanation of each one. What do they embody in the organization?
Yeah, so the six culture principles actually emanate from our three like founding values, right? So we had a value of excellence, inquiry, and caring were our three values. So excellence led us towards a culture principle of high expectations, right, and a culture principle of solutions first. What I'd call our blue culture principles. Blue is one of our colors. So high expectations is the idea that we constantly hold high expectations for ourselves and of others, and we work towards them, right? We believe in our capacity, we believe in others' capacity, and we hold each other to high expectations because the pursuit of high expectations is what generates excellence, right? And then solutions first is the idea that we acknowledge problems. They are problems, but we approach problems with a solution mindset. We approach problems not just to lay them at the feet of others, but to engage with others in solving them and making the world better. So that's solutions first. So those are two of our culture principles, and they reflect excellence, and that's a core value of being an innovator and a leader or a shaper, right? Then there are what I'd call our green culture principles, which emanate from the value of inquiry, right? And that's joy of learning and always growing. So a joy of learning is that I'm constantly curious. I want to learn. I seek out and I share learning for its own sake and for the benefit of others, right? And so I enjoy reading a book because I can get something from it, and I'd love to share that with you. And the fact that this is new software you're doing this podcast on, how awesome! We're going to learn about something
Yeah.
new, like the energy that it unleashes joy, and that joy fuels our learning. And not only the joy comes from our learning, but it also fuels more learning. That's the joy of learning, right? And always growing. The idea that I'm always growing, and I embrace failure as sort of a first attempt in learning. I embrace hardship and failure as an opportunity to get better and stronger, and that I hold a growth mindset. I understand that I can get better at almost anything. In fact, at anything, I can get better, and I just need to be able to build the skills and given the effort to get better. Right? I am not born a good mathematician or born good at art. Actually, I can become good at art. I can become good at mathematics, right? So that's always growing and joy of learning. Those two are the green culture principles. And then what I call the yellow culture principles, so they emanate from our value of caring, right? And that's servant leadership and greater together. Greater together is Ubuntu, that I am because we are, that we are more, I am enough alone, but I am made greater together with you,
Yes.
right? So it's not that I'm not enough alone, but in partnership with others, we can go further, and we are made greater and more meaningful through being part of being in community with others, right? And then servant leadership is just really that the way to lead is through service. That we look others and mission before self, I guess, is others and mission before self. And those are six culture principles. Those are what it means to be a Novenier, whether you're a student, a parent, a teammate, a CEO. Those are our culture principles, and they're what sort of define the mindsets and behaviors of a Novenier.
Okay, I really like that. And from where, how did this come about? How did the culture, because that's like the most intriguing part for me, and that's where my curiosity lies.
Hmm.
Where did the culture principles come up? Is it a group effort, or did you personally come up with it? Where did this all stem from?
Yeah, no, the values were something that our very early founding team, myself one of them, sort of thought about, and we defined. And before we were ever Nova Pioneer, while we were still sort of Pioneer Academies and then Nova Academies in Kenya, we were we defined, or even before Nova Academies, when we were just Pioneer Academies, we defined the three
Yeah.
values. And then when Pioneer Academies and Nova Academies, the founding teams of both those organizations joined together to say, let's be one. We kind of joined together to say, let's be greater
Yes.
together, right? And we said, okay, how are we? Well, we were both very clear that culture really mattered to us, right? Because essentially we're in the endeavor of developing mindsets and behaviors. Like that's
Yeah.
pretty core to what education is, and we'll only be successful at it if we shape what they are. Every organization has a culture. The question is, do you shape it or not? Do you actively develop what it is or not? And we were pretty determined to try to actively develop what it was. But the process wasn't just sort of Chinezi and Oliver and so on sitting down and writing it. There was a group of teachers and staff, so joint faculty and staff from both Kenya and South Africa, a small group of about, I'd say, 10 folks, who were sort of took it on as a project to say, let's put words to this, right? And while the co-founders, particularly myself and Oliver, probably were started sort of creating the options and really workshopping it initially, we brought in that group of about 10 folks, and then sharpened it, refined it, and then that group sort of then we started running workshops and championing it across, and not championing it, yeah, workshops sort of activated, build the language, build understanding, celebrate it, have fun with it
Yeah.
across Kenya and South Africa. So we wanted to be, one organization, one DNA, one mission, and culture was going to be the glue that made that possible. And so that was a process we went through to go from sort of three values, which were sort of articulated, so sort of were named but not well built out, into six culture principles that were very, I think, more clearly articulated and owned.
talking about like leadership and the culture principles and the small implicit things that the Nova organization has. How do you and the leaders that you surround yourself with, so the people you don't, not every day, and it's not possible, you don't have a CEO talking to every single employee of the day. Nova Pioneer has grown to a stage of where it's now, okay, we have managers and so forth, and yeah. So how do you and the people who you surround yourself with, mainly the leaders of the organization, and invest in the growth of the teams and the organization itself?
Yeah,
Where
I
does
mean,
that start?
we again at our foundation we are people and culture, and then obviously there's skill and practice that follows.
Mm,
But I think growth starts just investing in people and culture growth. And so you're right. I mean, if an organization were dependent on my time alone, or my skills alone, or my being able to being every conversation, every decision, well, we wouldn't go very far or very quickly, and we'd be pretty constrained. And that's sort of, I mean, there are enterprises like that.
yes.
So one people consulting firms, or if I was, working as in a one person effort, but I'm not. And so you're right. The key is to, and a key part of any entrepreneur, I think, is also to really find a way to attract and grow a great team. It starts with people who are good. We talked about mission fit and then culture fit, and then yeah, we actively grow and develop. And so there are a number of ways. One is just built into the very fabric of the roles and responsibilities we have. So the role of a dean in a school is to coach and support the educators. The role of a school leader is to coach and support the dean team and leadership team. The role of our what I call our chief of schools or directors of schools are to coach and support our school leaders. And my role is to coach and support and serve that everyone, but principally firstly through the executive leadership team at Nova Pioneer. And so one is through our roles, and so you have to have habits and practices like observation and coaching and feedback, and hopefully even in classrooms where you've seen a dean come in or another teacher come in and observe the teacher who's teaching, and they debrief it afterwards, because not only are they leading your learning, but they're also learning themselves and growing through learning, and that's part of the why one would be a Nova Pioneer is because we are all learning, and I've had 360 feedback. I sometimes go to either a member of my team or member of the board and say, please run a learning process for me because I need to learn, right? And so we're all constantly, the way we work, have built in these routines and structures. Similarly, then we'll have a people review, and our people review, it's sort of, some organizations have performance management review processes, and it's sort of that, but it's also learning review. So our initial goal setting is something we call a growth template. So it has culture, it has competence, and it has contribution. So Noveneer students have three C's, right? Character, capability, and connection. That's the three C's for our vision of a Noveneer.
Yes.
Noveneer teammates have three C's: culture, competence, and contribution. And the three C, the culture is, how am I living and leading the culture? Competence, how am I building the skills that can support the work that I do? And contribution, what is my performance contribution? Am I achieving the goals I've set out for myself? And that also is a framework that enables me to structure conversations that are both about performance but also about growth, right? And then we have then there are training programs. So
Yes.
we have, there's induction and orientation early, what we call mastery sessions, emerging leader programs, and that scaffolding is intended to support the toughest times in one's professional journey are often when one is changing roles. So for example, my first year in teaching was probably the hardest work of my entire life in all things I've done. And it was awesome learning and growth, but it was such a hard stretch. After learning, being comfortable, the next, when you move from leading learning in classroom to doing that and leading others, coaching other teammates, other adults, then then that's a new learning. That's a transition. And then when you go from that to being a school leader, for example, that's another transition. And in each of those transitions, we want to support those with specific training programs. So all of that is supporting growth in terms of growth defined as learning, and potentially, when the opportunities, growth moving into other positions of responsibility, right, and service. And so that's how we think
Mm,
about learning. And it's, again, as I started, we are people and culture, and for us to do what we're trying to do, which is support students learning consistently well across many schools across the continent, we have to be an organization that can develop each other, that can constantly develop each other in every arena of our work.
yeah. And I think that speaks on to what we're going into next, entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
where, well, I'm going to ask you about how Nova started, And what is your journey at the beginning? Because starting an educational group is way different to starting an online business or something like that. Here you are actually being involved in a child's life. And where did the start come from? What is it looking like in the start? Was there a team? How did you actually start scaling it up from the beginning?
Yeah, kind of depends on where you define the start. I mean, when I became a teacher, in some ways that was part of my journey, right? And learning about teaching and forming some views about what I hoped young people could get out of education, and building some insight into learning. That's an example. When I was a consultant, I got to study school systems across more than 20, 25 countries to understand what I think, what I observe, not just what I think, what I observe makes for great education and learning. And in fact, what I observed was that every school has dynamic and wonderful young people in it, and the question is, can they and the adults in the school collectively organize an experience that helps them unleash that in positive ways.
Mm,
But anyway, but specifically Nova Pioneer, I think the start was then stepping away from consulting and taking the first step. We started in a small office
mm,
on Rivonia Road that we rented, and just try to figure out, okay, so what do we call ourselves? Like, which curriculum should we use? I went off and researched a bunch of different curricula, visited a whole bunch of schools in different countries across the world, across South Africa, across in Europe, and I was in the US a bit, looking at what technology was doing in education, just a learning phase in Italy, where we got to know a bit more about Reggio Emilia. So, trying to pull these different influences and said, which of these do we think are uh, most a best fit with the vision of learning and outcomes we want to have for young people, right? And then so start to and that involved. I didn't do that alone, but with that I realized there are people who are a lot more expert in this than I am, and so then you have to build a small team, whether they're employees or advisors or co-founders, whatever the right role is, right fit for them and for you. And we put that together. And that was end of 2013, going 2014. Then we said, well, let's start piloting this. There's some things we're doing differently from other schools, particularly in how we teach. And there's some traditions we're trying to combine that haven't often gone together. The idea of experiential learning and inquiry with rigor and consistency of routine. How do we do those things? So we ran some pilot programs at Sir John Adams. We did a Saturday school, for example. In 2014 we ran a leadership program for youth, a winter leadership program when students were on holiday, and we also did a preschool program. And so that was an opportunity for us to start to build this and get a sense of, try out some of the things that could be, see how if they could be really good for students and for us before we opened
mm,
school. And then I think we'd done enough. Key was, if I'm sort of getting insights from this, we'd say, pull together a team that has some of the experience in the ways of learning that we needed. It couldn't just be any educators, because there's some brilliant educators, but whose approach to education was not going to be consistent with our intention or our vision. That would not be a good fit. We needed skilled educators who had an experience of education that was consistent with our intention and practice, because they were going to be the source of teaching and learning, and that those became our academic directors and leaders and so on, and our school leader. And so that's how we started. And I don't know, first open day, the night before our first open day, I was cleaning the bathroom in the White Lodge there at Omonde. I was fixing the carpet. I was figuring out what rooms we could go into, what rooms we couldn't go into. In the lodge building in Omonde, when you walk in, that right by the boardroom, there's like a bathroom there, right?
yeah.
And I remember, like, that's where I was from 6 p.m. to like 8 p.m. before the first open day, scrubbing the tiles and floors and trying, because the building was, we were just taking over from tenants that hadn't been there in a long time, and it was a mess, right? And running open day and like polishing that floor where I think is now a classroom with wooden floors, polishing the floors, and I was on my knees polishing, and that's what I was doing that evening. And the next day, welcoming families and giving a tour and giving a talk, and that's how it starts. And then you just kind of take the next step and you build a team. And with each teammate you bring on board, you hope you're bringing on someone who has strengths that you don't have. Not just you hope, you try, you deliberately work to make sure you bring on people who have strengths that you don't have, because that's how you get better. And so that's been the journey of getting started.
Wow. I literally got goosebumps when you said that you polish the floor and that type of thing.
Yeah.
That is some type of story. Well, not story, but it's the journey is just amazing. It just becomes even better and better. I don't know when the climax is going to come. So
Yeah, it's
the moment
funny.
you come into that climax, please let me know, because I really it's going to give me those the I want to start pausing here on my side here. Um, but when it came to the rise of Nova Pioneer, and I like
Mm,
to think of it as a rise, because the mission is not done.
mm,
you're still building. It's still a building.
mm,
And what did you do? I'm sure you went through mental phases of, okay, I'm immensely exhausted. How did you
mm.
recharge yourself? What's the process like? Because entrepreneurs have this vision where they have to hustle, like work 20 all nighters and so forth and that type of thing. Did you ever do that? And how did you actually like break out of that and like mentally recharge?
Yeah, I have a co-founder, and I'm interested in how you do it as a student as well, because you do a lot of things and you
Yeah.
work pretty hard, but you know how you do it. I have a co-founder who recently said that made a remark about a big part of leadership is self-care, and that's true. You have to be in a I have to have had enough sleep that I can be a good problem solver, and that I'm not irritable, for example, or not try not to be irritable, and so I think self-care matters. Um, I will say, yeah, I do work pretty hard. I have, I have, and I continue to occasionally have all nighters. I regularly work at, I'm regularly working to 1 or 2 a.m. And that's that. I probably do that 2 or 3 times a week. So it's not. I do work hard, but I also have to a couple ways I sort of build energy, and I have to watch out. It's kind of like when you are working out, you want to drink water before you're thirsty. Otherwise, you may be dehydrated before you get thirsty. And so that idea of drinking before you're thirsty is something I'm also about to care. Is making sure I'm getting adequate sleep. And if one night I don't get a lot of sleep, I get more sleep afterwards. I box once a week. I have a boxing coach who I work with once a week, and I that time is sacrosanct. I put on my calendar. It's blocked off. I get I can structure my day. I have more flexibility than many of my colleagues. If I'm teaching, I don't have flexibility. At certain times, I have to be where I am. In my role, I do have flexibility, so I can have a morning where after I drop my daughter off at school, I can come home and have a nap, or do the
Yeah.
boxing. So I have some flexibility, which I can sort of exercise self care. I also the other big part of it, and I'll say, is I also have to learn that um, what people observing me can set expectations for what the organization should be doing. And so I have to be careful that if I'm working at midnight, because that works for me, and I have figured out a rhythm that I'm comfortable with, and I make sure it works for me, then that doesn't, I need to be careful not to be sending out emails at midnight, for example. Because
Mm.
otherwise, what that does, it suggests to our team that we should always be I expect others to be able to receive emails at midnight. No, I boomerang that email so it goes out at 8 a.m. the next morning, right? And
Mm.
so by respecting others' time, I think you can create a culture where people can be well. And wellness is so, so we really have to take it seriously, particularly over the past 3 years. I think we've learned about the importance of looking after and being attentive to teammates and students, each other's wellness. And so, yeah, so short answer to that, I have, it's important that I'm conscious about my wellness. And I think I've become more thoughtful and aware of the things that give me energy and not. And there have been times that I've been more burnt out than others. But generally, I try to drink before I'm thirsty, and I try to have a routine that sort of keeps me healthy in the course of a week. That's for me. And then I realized my routine is not a fit for everybody, right? There are certainly minimum high expectations we set, and we do have hold high expectations, and we do ask a lot of our teammates. But that has to be tempered with real care for wellness. And the fact that my routine is okay to be working at midnight most nights in a week is not an okay expectation for others, and I don't want to signal that either. And so then I have to manage how others see that and what expectations they hear or see from me. And so I protect weekends for others, for example. I may work on a Sunday. I don't expect others to, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how I think about it. But I wonder, if I could bounce a question back to you, Vaheen, how do you manage what I know is it can be extremely uh, uh, big load in terms of what you have to do?
Yeah, look, as a Cambridge student, I love the system, but it's a lot of high work, high pressure. It sounds like I'm working in an industrial area, but I'm not. It's just academic life. I love it. I'm passionate about academics, just like yourself,
Mm,
Mr. Studio. Okay, but at the same time, I also understand when enough is enough. So
mm,
I work late nights. I can set up to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I can sit up till that time, and I'll be ready to go next morning at 4:30, waking up and getting ready for school.
wow.
Yeah, I don't live near the school, so that was my choice. I honestly don't
Mm,
live near the school. I live a very far distance from the school. So waking up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, either those times, although during exams it's like a really push for me. It's like 4:30, need to wake up, come on, let's just like that last 5 minutes. They say 5 minutes can change everything, and I believe in that.
mm,
5 minutes can
mm,
change everything. That, and waking up 5 minutes, well, I wake up 30 minutes before. So 30 minutes before, it just gets me in that zone. It's like, okay, today's another day. You need to push your hardest again. You're almost done with school. It's a final push now.
Mm,
You finally be able to get it. And I just have that mantra in my head where, okay, I'm gonna get there one day where I will be able to take a step back and I'll be able to get there. But for the time being, I need to push as hard as I can, because to get where I want to be and that vision in my head, I need to work for it. It's not going to come for free. There's nothing in this world that comes for free,
mm,
unless you're very lucky. And I like to believe that yes, there's luck in the world, but at the same time, you have to work hard for everything. And
mm.
so,
No, it's
uh,
interesting. I mean, I really appreciate your reflection and Snapsy for the drive. I would say there are two things I may have learned that are probably from this. At least sustainability for me, and I imagine it probably applies to others. Is one is two things that relate to your where you comment. One is even when you do that, like sleep. I can't tell you how I've come to observe how much better, happier, healthier, better teammate I am for others. More well I am when I get adequate sleep. So trying to figure out what is adequate sleep and making sure one is doing that. That's the drinking before you're thirsty. So that's one real point I would. And I know it runs a little against what you just said in terms of early rise, but like figure out the sleep you need and get it just a little bit more than that. And the second is the way you said earlier about you're passionate about learning. That's awesome. I have found that when I'm passionate about what I'm doing, it comes back to the beginning of our conversation when we talked about purpose. When I find purposeful meaningfulness in what I'm doing, I could work, 12-hour, 16-hour day, and I've got energy for days. And I've worked in jobs where I just, maybe it's my own lack of imagination, but I just haven't found that meaningfulness in it. And I'm working a 6-hour day and I'm feeling, man, I'm dragging here. And so that purposefulness, that motivation, intrinsic motivation is also a big part of sustainability and flourishing for me. You can work more, but if it's meaningful. But that's for me. For others, it's wonderful that you are finding rhythms that work for you. Just
I credit you, Mr. Chijioke. I've heard you talk in front of the entire school, and
Mhm,
your path to your path and so forth. And how researching and self-learning was actually a big part of your
mhm,
journey. And I'd like you
mhm,
to actually speak about that, because I think the audience, not only Nova Nears that would hear this podcast, but the others that are looking forward to like joining a school group that's actually passionate about self-learning, teaching you research skills, things that work in the
mhm.
practical world that's different to a traditional education.
Yeah, I mean, this we talked earlier about the trajectory you're on being in life, of sort of always growing, being more important than the point at which you are. There's a poem called I think the Journey to Ithaca, and always trying to get to a place, but it's actually the journey that counts. So growth, we always want to be growing, and that means that as a school and in any other environment, developing the skills of learning, what we call self-didactic skills, the skills of how to learn, how to frame a question, starting point. I can't tell you how many business meetings are wasted because we actually don't know what question we're trying to solve. I can't tell you how much money is wasted on people's time because we sit around a workshop for 2 hours and I say, wait, we actually don't understand our question. So can we frame what it is we're trying to solve, or what it is we're trying to learn? That gives us pretty good guidance to what we next need to go out and learn. Who do we need to talk to? What research do we need to do? I mean, the core skill of a management consultant, which I was for a while, and I observed, is the ability to learn quickly. And how does a management consultant learn quickly? Is because they're able to frame the question and structure it and figure out where to go learn and build rapid enough learning that they can then, and when they need to put on real expertise, they can do so. And so the idea that you guys can build specific skills that help you learn really important, and something that I very much hope that we are able to do for our students for throughout life, because that then we can be lifelong learners. We can be faced with a problem, name it, understand it, and go about learning what we need to solve it.
Yes, and I think further talking about self learning and so forth. You're a reader, and you've spoken about
Mm,
creativity of innovators and so forth. A book that you
mm.
read, and what books would you actually advise, or yeah, advise entrepreneurs, young teenagers, that they should read? It's like a must. Because I often get these questions. Like I read quite a bit, so last year my reading goal was 52 books. I've got to my 52 books, so this year it's 54, and this is up and dated to two.
Wow.
But that's like this my personal goal, and I have a lot of time that I spend. reading, and it also falls into those late nights. So it's not only working but also reading. It falls into that
Mm,
part there.
mm.
But the reading does help with my English essays. I'm not going to lie with that. The words that you can use. So it's a multi-purpose thing, self-learning, but also English learning. But what books would you recommend to people who are wanting to become entrepreneurs, leaders, innovators? What would you recommend?
First, I just recommend to read. I mean, Raheen, what you just described is a voracious amount of reading. So snaps to you. You know, I mean, that's fantastic. But first of all, just read, and I'd be less precise about what to read than you are reading and thinking about it, reflecting about it. And occasionally, when you read a bunch, pause to write reflections. You know, find you know, I think, frankly, even if it's just try to get a mix of reading. You know, read some for pleasure because it's a sort of it's fun and builds a habit that's exciting, and read some because they're sort of instructive books and so on. What I will share is, the couple books that have been important in my journey, entrepreneurial journey or life journey. Interesting, the one book I found myself gifting young people the most is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's For me, it was the right book at the right time. I read it when I was doing that job. I told you, database consulting. I was living in New York, and I was feeling very much off my path. And I was like, man, this can't be what the rest of my life an adult is like. You know, I was living this studio apartment in Brooklyn. In the winter, when I roll in my apartment, it's still dark. I get on the subway, it's still dark. I go to work. I'm programming databases on my computer all day. I step outside for 45 minutes at lunch to grab a slice of pizza, come back in. I go back. I'm in the subway again home, playing on this little game on my phone. And I was like, I was in the apartment where I roll on my bed. I roll on my bed in my kitchen. Like, it was that kind of small kind of. I was like, this is not what I want to be doing. Like, is this what it means to grow up? Because, like my brother has this. Yeah, it just fell off my path. I was getting a bit upset about it. And I just happened to read Paulo, the Alchemist, and it gave me the push and the encouragement and the chutzpah to say, I'm going to leave this job, which is paying pretty well, but feels off the path. I'm going to call up my old teacher, who was a mentor of mine, and ask for advice. And I'm going to and I became a teacher, and I was earning a third. I moved to a job that was paying me a third of what I was making as a consultant in New York, and I'm so glad I did. Best decision ever. And it's funny, it's even making a third of the salary, I ended up saving more,
Mm,
believe it or not. It's amazing how the world conspires. And the alchemist, he talked about manifesting in the world. Is it just sound out there? Is there a sentient world in some way? Well, I have found that when you step towards what the alchemist talks about, your personal legend, when you step towards something that's purposeful for you, the world does conspire to help. I, I don't have a clear explanation for it. I think there is some coincidence and some sort of, you move towards something, you build expertise there. You can model some of it, but not all of it can be modeled, right? And so it was the
yes.
right book for me at the right time, and so that's a book I often give to folks. And I could have read that same book 5 years earlier, and it would just been an interesting story, and I kind of like tossed it aside. But it was the right book at the right time, and so for folks who are sort of in that purpose finding space, it's a great book. And there are others. I talked about Tony Wagner's Creating Innovators. Is it the best book ever written? No, but it was really relevant to this idea of. It was really interesting to the idea of developing schools that that build innovative capacity, right? And it's all to say there have been a few books that have been powerful for me, that have been important to me in my journey. The kind of book I read at a given time depends on my energy and what I'm trying to learn or engage at that time. But my advice would just be to read this. There are so many books out there. We'll never get to all of them, but there's some really great ones. And if you're reading something that just isn't seeming useful, put it down and pick something else up. Give it a try. Don't stop after 20 pages. Give it a good shot. But and then there are so many books out there that can be good, thoughtful
Yeah.
books, and read them. Yeah, spiritual books. All yeah, read.
I think I can relate with The Alchemist. It wasn't my all-time favorite, but I have read it as part of like the school curriculum. I wouldn't have come across it if it wasn't to Nova. But in the book, I think I need to reread it, especially with refining purpose and so forth. And and it would be probably one of my books that I need to write down on my to-do list. And like, okay, let me go reread that book, because I was like around about grade 9, I think I started reading it, and finding purpose in grade 9 is very difficult for somebody like that. I don't think anybody got a purpose. Like, I want to be. I think the only purpose I had in grade 9 was I want to become rich. That was the only thing I want to like. Okay, I want to become rich. And yeah, it's just a big difference when
But yeah, but I also don't put pressure on yourself around that. That's okay. Purpose can come later, and like just being learning is great purpose. And like I said, The Alchemist is the right book at the right time. So, pick it up in 10 years, pick it up in 5 years. It has there's so many books that have different meaning. I remember Richard Wright's The Native Son is a book I remember really really reading. And when I first read it, actually I read it part of school curriculum. I was like, okay, interesting novel. We discussed it. I can write an essay about it. Great. But then I was reading it one time when I'd taken what if sort of like a semester abroad from university, and I was traveling on my own across basically from southern to eastern to western Africa, and I read it on that trip, and man, did it come alive for me in a different way. And so the same book at different times in our lives can carry different messages and meaning. And so yeah, maybe store it away, Vahin, and 5 years from now, or anytime when you're sort of just reflecting on your path, pick it up and see if it's useful.
Definitely, I'm just gonna put it down there. That's like one of those things.
And then you have to send me a book recommendation too.
Yeah,
I'd appreciate one.
definitely. After this, I will be sending a few book recommendations as long as you reciprocate to me. Um,
Absolutely.
and next point that I wanted to start talking about is scaling Nova Pioneer in the future. Nova Pioneer is, I would consider it like half of the like it's like your soul in a way. You believe in that mission. Yeah, making mistakes there. Um, uh,
Mhm.
I think to anybody who's listening to this podcast, entrepreneurs and so forth, how did you get this funding for Nova Pioneer, the education group? It's not, I know for a fact, again, I can relate it to online businesses. It's not a cheap thing. It's
Mhm.
money intensive. You need people, that you need networking and so forth. How did you actually start raising the funding for it?
Yeah, and I was fortunate that quite early I was able, like I had enough sort of friends and family who had either worked with me or been along my side of my journey long enough to know that I was serious about it, something I really wanted to try to do. And if I wasn't successful, it wasn't going to be for lack of effort or lack of intention. It's just going to be that I wasn't successful at it. And then I guess I had enough confidence in my capacity to have a decent shot at doing something okay with it. And so a lot of the first initial funders, in addition to my own, what I was able to bring to it from my own prior work, was where other colleagues from where I'd worked before and some family. So it was networks, as you mentioned, and that was sort of the first round of financing. And then as we built, at that point, that's kind of what we needed because at that point, no institution um, or bank would finance, because it's just too early. There are, for other folks who are looking for financing, there are sometimes competitions that one can win, entrepreneur competitions or grants, and there are some even very early investors potentially, but mine was more sort of friends and family. And then about 3 years, 2 3 years in, we got our first institutional investor, which was basically a collection of high net worth families who together had a vehicle that they were using to invest and the person who was managing it was someone I'd actually known from college. So it was again a network, but and the important. I do not underestimate the importance of building social capital through your studies and through your work. It's important, and not just for not just for like in a Machiavellian. I'm just going to use it because I want that relationship, but building deep like meaningful relationships, and then knowing that those will support you and you'll support them throughout your life. And then the last most recently has been we've been more traditional institutional investors. So another South African family office, and there's a private equity firm, and we've also had real estate investors who we've worked with on our properties, some banks in here and in Kenya, in South Africa and Kenya. So we've become much more institutional type of investors more recently, but it all started off in terms of entrepreneurial start with a bit of what I could, but if you don't have money, then it doesn't have to be there. I will say, Vahin, looking ahead, if I were ever to start um, entrepreneurship again, I would start by going as far as my own money could take me, probably, and I'd look for paths. I'd look for ideas or solutions, approaches that minimize the amount of external capital one needs for a bunch of reasons. And then if I was raising external capital, try to raise probably substantially what I need, more substantially upfront. But at the end of the day, you work with what's available to you. That's what the creativity of entrepreneurship is. You whatever resources available to you, you work with those, and you try to turn them as rapidly as you can into revenue.
Okay, and like that, I think this is for a little bit of personal reasons, as building the expandable mind and so forth. But in
Mhm.
terms of building your team and so forth, how did that actually come about? How were you able to, should I say, compensate them for their skills, and that you were able to get funding from family and friends. But how was that building? How did the building actually start? How did you know that, okay, this is the right person I need to hire for this job? This is what I need them to do, and so forth. How did you find that out?
Yeah, well, I'll say briefly about each of them. Compensation, earlier, we had to compensate people, and fortunately, we had enough capital we could pay some salaries, not top salaries, but workable salaries. In some cases, entrepreneurs can't, and you can't, and it has to be folks who are willing to be part of the entrepreneurial journey and have the capacity to give some time. But we were able to pay some salaries, and then also early on for the very earliest joiners, some equity. So you're on the often when you're very in the ground floor, you get some ownership stake in the business that you're or in the enterprise that you're building. So that was true for our founding teams as well. Now, but the more important question, also the more in hindsight important question is, yeah, is the right fit. And I think the earlier you're on a journey, the more important it is to have those conversations with your founding teammates and your early teammates about their fits, about what their objectives are. Do they want the same things you want? Is one building a lifestyle business? Is one building a growth business? Those have very different journeys and experiences, and if you differ in those, you could create some real strain in the relationship, and therefore it would impact what you're building. And so having open conversations about it, and then most importantly, if you are a driving entrepreneur or leader in any role in an organization, try to find folks who bring skills and experience that you don't have, who complement you and ideally are better than you. I can't tell you how powerful it's been to have a leadership team that is more skilled than I am. Like that's been that's been awesome. When I think about it in my co-founders and building culture with Oliver, or in Rahel, who's a chief of schools and Nova Pioneer, and her skill in developing and supporting schools, like having skills that I don't have. And I could go across the board and talk about how my teammates are all more skilled in important ways than I am. I think that has been singularly the most important thing about building a strong team is having really special teammates. Uh, Hugely important.
Okay. I like the whole how it's like this work together for you. It's like just
Mm,
built up slowly but surely, and everybody saw
mm.
the mission. And well, I think I've asked you the question before. The startup days of Nova Pioneer. You spoke about how the open day of the Nova Pioneer Monde campus. And I think you need to tell more people the story of this, because I did not know it. It's so amazing to see that uh, where it was to where it is right now. And if there was ever like photos that were taken and so forth, it would be the perfect moment to like, okay, this is where we are right now. And it would be like the perfect writing piece.
I'll look back and see. I'll look back and see if I can find it. I'll share some.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
Love to tell the stories sometime.
yeah, what is the? I know that we have the six culture principles, but what is one of the things that when you started Nova Pioneer, what is the one of the things that every single day that when you came to the office or the school or wherever you were working with the team, what is one of the things that every morning you used to do with the team?
Of course, it's a good question. Do we do any one? I mean, I don't know if it's any one routine we always done, but we've generally always had some form of a check-in, and now we do. And it's something else we've built in. I learned from one of my co-founders, and we built in. And we don't do it all the time, but I find it powerful whenever we do is do what we call shout-outs at the end of a session. And so check-in is usually just a way to one, break the ice, get us focused on what we're about to do. We'll just check in with each other, and the best check-ins often you learn something interesting and fun about each other. So I know you all had just at Nirvana Monday Second. We just recently had a day when private universities came through and shared about themselves, and you all got to meet with them and talk with them.
Yes.
We're excited about that. So the check in that afternoon we had a Nova Pioneer Leaders Call was tell us about how and when you chose the tertiary institution you attended. And so there was a quick check in. We went around the circle and everyone shared it, but it builds community, it builds connection, and I get to know a different part of your story. So I get through connection. Connection is really important. Trust, and trust is a real source of team culture. So that's something we've long done at check-ins, and we generally, in most meetings at Nova Pioneer, unless they're very short meetings, they'll start with a check-in. And it's a version of a do now, for our classrooms, right?
Yeah.
But it's a sharing one. And then to close, we don't do it nearly as often as I think we should, but which is shout outs or gratitude. Essentially, shouting out others, appreciating others, or sharing gratitude for someone else in the organization or something in the organization,
Mhm.
whether they're in the room or not, whether they're part of the call or not. And I think it's a hugely positive culture building, and yeah, it's positive culture building and builds appreciation, gratitude, and gratitude is the source of happiness. Like gratitude is the root cause of source of happiness. And so doing that as a closeout. Those are two routines that I think we use. We don't always do the we don't we more, as I said, I would like to do more often. I would like to more often do the checkouts and the shout outs and the gratitude circles. But those are examples of culture building routines we have as Nova Pioneer.
I think the audience would like to know. So I know the Nova Pioneer mission. What is the overall
Mhm.
mission? I knew it from the day I walked into Nova Pioneer for the orientation. They're like, we're gonna build schools across the African continent, and I think it was 100 schools, if I'm not mistaken. But we're gonna build that and the 100 schools across the African continent and so forth. And I was like, yes, now that's a mission. I like the mission, but what is I'd like to hear it from you. Like, what is the mission from day one? What is like your selling point? What is like, okay, we're gonna do this. What is your big
Yeah.
statement?
Yeah, I'm gonna differentiate between the mission and the vision statements.
Hmm.
So, mission is to develop innovators and leaders who will shape the African century.
Yes.
That's our mission. It's a timeless mission. So we want to develop innovators and leaders, that is shapers, create an environment which young people learn to shape. And that doesn't mean that other young people can learn to shape, but it means that our Noveniers graduate and they see capacity in others. And you talk about leadership, they can pull together that collective capacity towards positive purposes. So innovators and leaders, that idea that shaping, and then the African century, that we really believe this century and we really believe Africa has a lot to offer the world, and we are not yet offering as much. When we are not yet in a position where we have been able to marshal what our possibilities for the world to shape it
Yes.
as much as we need to, and we can, and we will. And so that idea, and that came from a real reflection on, the tremendous youth talent and potential across the continent, but the dearth of collective capacity amongst those youth to the wherewithal to turn that into doing well and doing good. So doing building prosperity for oneself and contributing to the world. And that if we don't do that, if we don't develop that kind of creative capacity, there's just not enough jobs for you and your peers to step into. There's not enough. And so you need to be creators of those jobs and opportunities. The solutions are there, but they're not yet manifest. So we have to, and if we don't, then we have so many young people, and the percent of unemployed and disenfranchised young people in this country and on this continent is is dire. It's to me, it's a top five world problem. It's not just a South African or African challenge. It's a global challenge. And there are two paths. There's a path of burn it down, and there's a path of build it up. And by our mission enables us to be on a path of build it up by backing young people who have that incredible capacity and vision and energy to do it. So that's what our mission is. The vision is how we make it manifest in the foreseeable horizon. The mission may take us beyond this 100 years, and it'll still be the African century at that point, right? But the beyond the vision is now what you talked about, which is the 100 schools, great schools across East, West, and South Africa that are developing Noveniers with the three C's, the vision of a Novenier. And so when we are far from 100 schools, by now I hope we'll be at 70. We are at 16, going into 16 into next year, 14 currently. And so but we'll still track towards it. And most importantly is that each of those schools needs to be a beacon of excellence and value. Like each of those schools needs to do a good job. And the students in it need to be getting outcomes and experiences of an Novenier. And so that's our mission. That's why the mission, and then the vision is how it's manifest in the foreseeable horizon.
Mm. And now we're coming to an end. We're wrapping up this
Mhm. Yep.
podcast conversation. But I just want to speak about teacher appreciation, something that not a lot
Mm.
of people know about. But how do you, as the leader of the group or education group, um, appreciate teachers? How important is it? Do you actually are you in the classes? I know that your schedule's busy. It's not possible to sit in every class and just listen to the teacher and give feedback, give the comments and grows and so forth. But how do you appreciate your teachers?
Yeah. Uh, I'm oh like I spend so I spend a lot of time thinking about how I can do a better job of that, right?
Okay.
Because I feel a ton of appreciation. I try to express a ton of recognition, appreciation, and for teachers and for my other colleagues too. I can't tell you how much our team gives of themselves, teachers and folks who don't have the privilege of teaching in classrooms. Um, but speaking about teachers specifically, how one is by acknowledging the contribution they make, and trying to acknowledge that I see the contributions they make, and I value and appreciate the contribution. And not just I, Chinezi, but organization we do of each other. Two is by trying to create organizations in which that appreciation doesn't just come from me; it comes from each other, right? So that we can whether it's a shout out or gratitude, whether it's a coaching, whether it's not just in verbalizing, but through action, as you said, sitting and observing, taking the time to be thoughtfully reflective and give feedback. Feedback is a gift. It's a sign of professional love. I care for you and your growth, and I'm helping you grow. It is not an attack. If we have feedback that's an attack, that is not appreciative. If we have feedback that's a gift, even if it's tough feedback, where the intention is to help you grow, that is a sign of professional love and professional commitments to each other, right? And so, building an organization when we do that is how I show we appreciate the professional commitment and contribution. I think about what the teaching in 2020 during the pandemic, how our teachers showed up with our students. Our students also showed up, but they really showed up in a way that says our teachers took salary, had salary impact. We all did. They put themselves at risk when they had to come to school, when we knew at times when we didn't know, we weren't quite sure what the pandemic was, and and that's an incredible period of demonstration of professional commitment. And teachers do it partially because of professional commitment, but also just because of our students. Like, our teachers love our students and they give so much because of it. And that's our teachers, the teachers do in general, right? And so I'm constantly like, and yet I think we don't do a good enough job of making visible the depth of our appreciation, and we have finite on resources. A teacher can, if you try, it is a you can't compensation alone will never meet expressed appreciation. While it's important, it will never be adequate. And so, I don't have a perfect answer. I don't think that we do that well enough, Faheen. I really wish we had ways to do it. And often I think appreciation, when students make visible to teachers, I appreciate you, or I appreciate XYZ. It's hugely powerful. As a teacher, it was the most important source of fulfillment for me, was when I heard from my students. Observed my students' growth, or heard from them what they appreciate about my commitment to them. And so, maybe I could ask those who are listening here, students, parents, others, just to give a shout out to a teacher, write a unsolicited note in which you just say, "Hey, I see you do this, and I appreciate it, and thank you." Doing something like that would be huge. But if you have suggestions, it's something I think about a lot, and I wish I could do an even better job of.
Yeah, one suggestion I could give off the top of my head
Yeah.
is, as a group leader, they all understand. Yes, we all got jobs and so forth, but the most important thing, and I've learned it through reading other people's books, and the type of leader I want to be in the near future, and that is making sure that I check in regularly with the people. So if they have a problem, they're able to be in a safe space that they know that, okay, I'm gonna be able to correct this and so forth. So making time for, yes, I'm available if you need to talk and so forth. That would be like
Mm,
that would be my vision of, like, okay, how can I help you? I like to go to that Good Doctor on Netflix. I don't know if you've watched it, but
mm.
how can
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
help is gonna be like, kind of like, the ultimate question I raise to every teacher: how can I help you better the teaching phase? How can I appreciate the work that you do? Because it's not easy. You are a teacher, so you know that teaching is not easy. You're dealing with a bunch of us that are 20 times, we are sometimes menaces. We sometimes just back chat, and
Don't be so hard on yourself, Fahim, but I get what you're saying.
yeah. But that would be my ultimate, like, one of the ways that maybe developing something in that way. And that is something
It's
that
good.
maybe the African generation or Nova Pioneer can be like pioneering in that direction of, how can we actually appreciate teachers better than every other school in the world, or even in the nation itself. That could be one of the questions I would target myself. And
Thank you for both those recommendations. Those are great. Thanks, Fahim.
no, no, no problem. Now we're coming to our traditional wrap up, the rapid fire
Mm,
questions, and I hope you're ready for them.
okay.
But number one, tell me about the three most influential people in your life and how they've impacted you.
Early life, my parents and my father in particular, but I remember my mother and father. So early life, my parents. Um, early life. High school, my mentor, high school and early career, my mentor, a guy named Paul McAmer. He was my mathematics coach, soccer coach, and advisor. And hugely was a father figure when my father was in Nigeria and I was in the U.S. in boarding school. And right now, my wife and daughter, I think, are the most influential people in my life.
I like it. If you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what is one piece of advice? This one, what would it be?
Always growing and stay interested. Always growing, joy of learning. Always growing. It's the trajectory that matters. Keep growing. Be proud of what you've done. Keep growing. Humility and growth, and joy of learning. Stay interested. In people who are interested are interesting. Stay interested. It opens up the world.
Really like that one. If you could go back, are you a coffee or tea guy, Mr. Chijioke?
Coffee right now. Used to be tea. Now I'm coffee.
Okay. If you could have a cup of coffee with any historical figure, who would it be?
That's a really hard one. I'm not sure, but I think what I would probably get the most out of is an ancestor somewhere along the way. I don't know if it's my great grandmother, grandfather, or someone. And I don't know if it'd be coffee we're drinking or palm wine, but it'd probably actually. I'm more curious on the Nigerian side only because that history is less documented than the European side, and so yeah, probably either my father's grandfather or grandmother or someone like that. I just think I'm so curious about their life and existence, and that would be awesome.
I like it. What has been your biggest failure, and what have you learned from it?
There've been. I'm constantly failing. There's so many aspects of it. I don't. I struggle to identify just one as the biggest, and I think along the lines. The thing that is, I constantly like get pushed by, or I feel most challenged by my in failure is when I feel like we are not. Whenever I walk through one of our schools, for example, I both feel really proud of of our students and our teachers for what we're achieving and excited about what we achieved, but I also feel dissatisfied because I think we can be more. We can have better experiences. Our students, teachers, and myself, we can all do better, and we can all be. There's more to the vision of what we all share, and so I think I'm constantly in that mix, and so the sort of failure in the sense of like when we're not being our best and how to be better is probably the thing that stays with me the most. But it's not a once off; it's a constant improvement kind of journey. So very hard one to just pick one thing, but it's the sort of the constant, gosh, not yet there. How do we do better kind of thing? That's I think is where I grow the most from.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm always wanting to improve. I kind of relate
Yeah,
to my brain as AI software that always wants to improve and get better
I
and
love
better
it.
and better. But yeah,
Absolutely,
uh, what is the most
absolutely.
important lesson you've learned over your journey?
Hmm. There are a few, but perhaps the most is the one I mentioned around from The Alchemist that the world, when you move towards things that are purposeful or that are in your interests, that you're passionate about, the world does conspire to help. And so, I mean, think about it. You think about, I don't know, yeah, pursue something, pursue things that you find meaningful. I'll tell a funny way of telling the story is when I was a kid, I used to complain to my mom that she always made me clean the bathrooms at home. I was always cleaning the bathrooms. And I'd be like, Mom, but you're making me clean the bathrooms. I'm the one who always cleans the bathrooms. She's like, but Chinezi, you're so good at it. So I was like, oh, that is the worst because I used to get mad because she's telling me I'm cleaning the bathrooms because I'm good at it. So I'm going to do a bad job of it. But two offshoots to that. One is that I when you if you work on the things you're interested about, you build expertise and experience. You encounter others who share that. That you see possibilities. You discover that there's financing that's interested in that. The world conspires to help because you're moving towards it, and then you see it opens up possibilities. So move towards the things you want to spend your life doing. Similarly, do those things well. It's funny. I when I went to at college, when I was at Harvard, my job was as a student janitor. That was the job I chose. That was the first job I chose. I did a
Wow.
couple other jobs, but I always stayed a student janitor. And part of being a student janitor was cleaning bathrooms. I cleaned bathrooms in the residences where other students were the students. So I did some other jobs in libraries and Sanders Theater and some. But I always stayed a student janitor, and I tried to do that job really well. I would scrub the showers. I remember these dorms where students would have like these magnetic letters, and I'd always leave a message for the students, the other students who were there. And And it paid. It was I took that job in part because it was the best paying job
Mhm.
on campus, and I needed to earn some money, but a lot of folks doing that job just sort of went in, brushed the minimum, signed out the maximum hours, and left. I always signed in exactly how much time I worked because I always remembered that one day I believed I was going to lead an organization and I would expect other people to be honest about their time,
Mhm.
if that was important. And so I was going to be honest about my time when no one was watching. I was going to be honest about my time, and then I was going to do the best darn job I possibly could. Because I remember that thing, it's Michelangelo. Sweep streets like Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, and I got so much out of it because it was hard work, but I felt good about it, and I actually built friendships with folks who were like who is this dude who's working so hard to actually clean my bathroom? Does he really care? And also we strike up and we be friends, and it wasn't a point of embarrassment that I was cleaning students' bathrooms. It was actually a point of joke and relationship and camaraderie. So two things I take from that story where the idea of firstly work I don't only work in bathrooms. I move towards work I wanted to be
Yes.
doing, but the work you're doing, like do it to the best of your ability, and you'll get something out of it. You get something good out of it intrinsically and potentially extrinsically as well.
Yeah. And I think one quote that sticks in my head, it's kind of like one quote that I keep on my phone at all times, is by Napoleon Hill. He says, "The man who does more than he is paid for will soon be paid for more than he does." And he doesn't mean
Yeah,
monetary.
right.
Maybe Napoleon Hill does mean monetary. He was a very wealthy man. But in terms of
Mm,
knowledge, you can consider the knowledge and the networking and the friendships that you could gain from this cleaning. I work at a pharmacy and I've cleaned vomit. And at one stage, I thought it was a really
yeah,
bad job. Why did I sign up for this? I deal with people ranting at me because they're not getting better, and I started taking pleasure in it. I'm like, how can I help you? What can I do better? And it's a
totally.
small
And,
pharmacy.
and, and
It's
think
not
about
a,
the patient.
excuse me.
I was just think about the patience or the patience you built or the empathy you built from doing that. That's you growing. That's you're getting paid more than like the quote, the Napoleon Kaufman quote you just mentioned. Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt, but that really resonates. You get more than is obvious.
Yeah, it's been so great chatting to you today. I've learned so much about you.
Likewise.
It's this your journey is, like I say, a Hollywood story. It could be made into a Hollywood story. So any producers out there, please, this is a good story. It's it reminds me of like a upcoming. It's like nobody actually saw this.
Mm,
It's like a story of revelation. So thank you so much,
true.
Mr. Chinezi Chijioke, for coming onto the Expandable Mind podcast. It was amazing speaking to
Yeah,
you today.
thanks, Vahina. Real pleasure to enjoy this. Enjoy speaking with you, and thanks for taking the time. And I look forward to both our journeys ahead. We've got a lot to learn and a lot to contribute.
To our listeners out there, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a 5-star rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at expandable_mind. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.